All right, Steeler fans, welcome back. It is Monday morning. It's time for the Monday morning conversation. I am excited to have Scott Kennedy back. Scott covers the Atlanta Falcons for us at Fans First Sports Network. Scott, welcome back to the program. How are you?
It's good to be back. Glad to have me. Atlanta Falcons, among other things.
That's
I
true.
don't like to pigeonhole myself,
Yeah,
into
yeah,
there.
I get
So,
it.
it's fun. Growing up an Atlanta sports fan, I became a fan of the process, which meant you
Right.
had to be a fan of other teams to watch any meaningful football.
Well, and people that might be listening and that might have listened to Scott, this was right after the Senior Bowl had wrapped up. When we were talking about Arthur Smith just being hired, and they're like, why are we having this guy on the show again? There's a reason why we're having him on the show, and it's not all based solely on Arthur Smith. We'll bring up Artie's offense, but until then, I do want to ask you about the Senior Bowl. You were there in attendance,
Mhm.
and you saw two Steelers draft picks there. Actually, both round 3 picks, Peyton Wilson and Roman Wilson in opposite order. If you're looking at when they were drafted, when you think about these players and what you saw them do down in Mobile, any takeaways? I'm just curious what you thought early on in the process.
Y'all are just collecting Wilsons, aren't you?
Yes, we are.
This is the Pittsburgh Wilsons. I know who your uniform sponsor should be, for goodness
That's
sakes.
true.
We talked a lot about, one of the most impressive offensive linemen there was Jackson Powers Johnson. And I was like, okay, this makes sense. Steelers need a center.
Yeah.
He was as good a center as I've seen, but I think there were some injury concerns there that really knocked him down in the draft, because I was like, how high is too high for a center if you get your guy for the next 10 to 12 years? Is first round too high? I always say positional value doesn't mean anything if you get a game changer. There is no positional value on a game changer. I don't care what they play. If they're changing the game, they're valuable. But it made sense. They go 1 and 2 with Fontenot, and then Frazier, and then I think they got a pair of freaking steals in the 3rd round. You're looking at this, and nobody's ever really excited about defensive line and offensive line. It's like, okay, but I want the flashy players. Roman Wilson and Ricky Pearsall were arguably the top 2 wide receivers, top 2 offensive performers at the Senior Bowl. Pearsall snuck into the 1st round with the San Francisco 49ers, and Roman Wilson falls all the way to the 3rd. And after the combine and all the numbers they put up and all this stuff, I had them like this. I'm like, I'm happy with either one of these guys in the 35 to 45 range. And you get him in the 3rd. Roman Wilson has sticky hands. He's got really good acceleration. You look at his burst, you look at his shuttle times, and then he's like, okay, well, I love the way he catches the ball. I love the way he runs routes. Now let's watch him in the combine. Oh, yeah, he's a pretty damn good athlete too. So I thought he was a 2nd-round guy all along. That you got him in the 1st, to me, was a steal. And I think he's going to be a good Pittsburgh Steeler for a long time.
What do you think caused? So you said Pearsall, who went the very tail end of the 1st round, and Roman Wilson doesn't go to the 3rd. What do you think, if you had them right next to each other when you do the comparisons, what was the differentiating factor that caused him to fall all the way to the round 3?
I'd probably have to look at it. Ended up being their measurables. I would think Pearsall, I think, was top 5, top 2 actually. I think in like vertical jump and like shuttle time at the event. So Pearsall performed a little bit better, but Roman Wilson certainly was good enough.
Right.
But as far as the size similarities, that type of stuff, maybe it's the same reason people were poo-pooing JJ McCarthy. Well, it wasn't a high volume passing offense. Dude, I'm not going to question stats on a team that's 15-0. That's the only stat I care about at the end of the day. It's like, well, why wasn't he throwing the ball more? Why should I have? We won every freaking game. So, it could have been part of the volume, could have been the passing offense. I don't know.
Yeah.
Why he fell. Maybe there's something in there we don't know. We had a little niggle. He's, I don't know, because this was a guy that should have been in the 2nd round, in my opinion.
So when you think about Roman Wilson and how he fits in an NFL scheme, we won't go into Arthur Smith's offense just yet. Do you see him more as a slot, or do you think he could actually play on the outside? He's not a big guy in terms of size. He's not a big guy, but he does move well. You mentioned that. Where do you see him fitting in the NFL in terms of positionally?
I pictured him as a slot guy. That said, I'm old, so I kind of still have these buckets. Okay, you're under 6 feet tall, you play in the slot.
Right.
But it's, the phrase is, especially with Arthur Smith, you hear the phrase positionless football. So he can move around. In my old mentality, with his size and his quick burst skill set, change of direction, that's the guy I want in the slot. So is that where he ends up? That in my mind, yes. But that might not be the case as things evolve, so to speak, and you've got 4 or 5 wide receiver sets. Used to make fun of the run and shoot. Now it's kind of a base set.
Yeah, pretty much is. It is. So Roman Wilson is going to be someone to keep an eye on, but you also got to see firsthand Peyton Wilson out of NC State. And this is a guy Steelers fans, as they continue to learn more and more about him, he seems like a freak of nature. He's huge. He's really tall. He's lean. A lot of people say he might be, doesn't have the typical inside linebacker build, but this guy's an athlete. What did you see down in Mobile, if anything, on Roman Wilson?
It's hard when you're in events like this. The 2 positions that are probably the least valuable for what you take out of it are running backs and linebackers, because there's no hitting for the most part. There's some bumps, and you see the guys run by, and they swipe at the ball because stay up, stay up, stay up. You hear that on every single rep. But if you're not hitting or being hit, it's hard to really tell what you've got at the running back and linebacker position. That said, the speed, my God, the closing speed on this guy, the side to side ability for him to go sideline to sideline or track down. You're going to see guys on sweeps who think they're going to get the corner, and they're just not. Yeah. And, like I said, being old, I'm old enough to remember when linebackers and running backs were cool. It's the Mike Singletary, Walter Payton days, in the 80s. Franco Harris, Greg Lloyd, those days, edge guys are still good. But I love the closing speed that this guy has. And, you saw in mocks early on that he was sneaking into the back end of the first round too. Yeah. So, I've always said, you had me on before, and I've always said how much I love watching. I always envy how the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Baltimore Ravens, y'all might not like each other, but from the outside looking in, the way y'all draft and build teams, it's like, oh, I love this guy. Yeah, he's going to end up a Raven. Oh yeah, love this guy. Perfect. What makes sense to get a really good football player at the back end of the first? The Steelers will do that. So to be able to get these guys in the 3rd round, again, I think these are at worst 2nd round picks, with upside. Again, this is all before they ever step on the field, and we can play whataboutism all day. I don't expect a 6th round guy to make an impact. Well, what about this guy? You hear that all the time. Yes, I know. But a linebacker in the 2nd round that's a high pick for an inside linebacker these days. And I still think he should have gone up there just because of his production, and his closing speed is better than most safeties. You see some of the highlights of him chasing down guys, and it's jaw-dropping.
Yeah, no, it is. It is. And you bring up, and I wanted to talk with you about this, was the process. Because you mentioned that the last time you were on the show about how the Steelers and the Ravens, they do mirror each other very well in terms of their approach to acquiring skill, whether it's through the draft or free agency. We brought up last time you were on the show how Tyler Linderbaum is not a sexy pick, yet they have their center now for the next 10 plus years. And he's going to be really good. Why? Because that's just how they do business. The Steelers, I feel like they benefited from a lot of teams. Maybe, I don't know. I did not see, and I'll ask you this, because as you're a draft guy, I did not see that many quarterbacks going in the top 15 selections. And I know I'm not picking on the Michael Penix.
No, I'm not either. I'm laughing just because I think the league's quarterback crazy.
They are.
There was a pretty good article, and I think it may have been in NFL.com. I don't remember what it was, but it's like the middle class of quarterbacks is gone.
Yeah.
You can't tell me that there's a quarterback, 6 quarterbacks are worthy to go in the top 12, but the next best guy is 5th round. It's the biggest gap ever. No, I don't think that. It's just that this was a specific draft where there were some good guys, and part of it had to do with the COVID years, where there were some guys that had stuck around a little longer and, may have been booted out and may have been 3rd round picks, last year, but an extra year, and there were some teams that just desperately needed a quarterback. It's ironic because, you know, the Atlanta Falcons, who I cover, and the Denver Broncos, who I cover on a daily basis, they were two of those teams. And my number one idea for what's your number one goal for this, Scott? What would you do? It's like, well, I would try and get Russell Wilson or Justin Fields, and I would draft a rookie. That would be my number one goal. And I would take all that extra money and I'd put it into building a team around those guys.
Yeah.
And it ended up that the Pittsburgh Steelers get Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. Now, you might not be set beyond this year.
Correct.
You don't know, but it made sense to try and do that. And, you know, maybe the Steelers go with a quarterback if one of those guys falls to 20, but there's so many desperate teams for quarterbacks that they overdrafted. I believe they overdrafted.
Yeah, and you look at Fautanu, who most people, if you believe mocks, and I don't believe every mock I read, but I do trust some more than others, they had this guy being on the verge of being a top 10 pick at some point, and maybe at least top 15 and top half of the draft, and he falls all the way to the Steelers. The value pick of Zach Frazier, I will be honest, a lot of Steeler fans started to really freak out in round 2 when Jackson Powers-Johnson goes to the Raiders. And everyone's thinking, okay, this is the first center selected, even though they drafted him to be a guard. And it's like, is there going to be a run at this point? Is this the juncture where things are going to happen? Would they have to move up? They don't. They get their guy in Frazier, who I think is going to be a really good player for them for a long time. And he has a lot of experience. And then Mason McCormick, the 4th round pick. We talked about the 3rd round picks and Wilson. Let's now tie these together. And let's talk about Arthur Smith, someone you covered closely in his time as the head coach of the Atlanta Falcons. He did call plays for the Falcons. His offense is different. I think it's kind of a throwback offense in terms of what he wants to do, at least what he did in Tennessee. How did he handle that in Atlanta, though? That's the question.
Yeah, and not everybody has, you know, Derrick Henry. You know, Derrick Henry's just built different. When he was coming out of high school, you know, he's this 6'3", 6'3.5", 210-pound running back. You're like, okay, running backs aren't that size. But he was, you know, he's a state 100-meter champion who's rushing for 3,000 yards a season. I mean, just putting up Tecmo Bowl numbers. And we're like, oh, but is he going to be a running back? And as he moves up and he learned how to run tough at Alabama, he became this go-to guy when he was at Alabama. So he's a little different. Now, it's hard for me to say, despite watching it for 3 years, it's hard for me to say what the Arthur Smith offense is in the last couple of years because I don't know that I got to see it.
Yeah.
You know, you've got Matt Ryan on his last legs, an immobile statue, a very sit-back, accurate quarterback who's going to pinpoint guys and was very good for Kyle Pitts. You go to more of a mobile threat in Marcus Mariota, who is inaccurate as hell. So I don't know that I can trust him throwing the ball. And then you go to Desmond Ridder, who had some RPO ability in his game, but just shrunk from the big moments. If you watch soccer, you call him a box-to-box midfielder. He's really good from, you know, the penalty area to the penalty area and in between there. That's kind of how Desmond Ridder was. He was okay inside the 20s, but man, in his own red zone and in the other team's red zone, he was a turnover machine. When he gave the ball away, by God, he made it count. It wasn't 3rd and 17 at midfield. It was like 1st and goal at the 5 or 1st and 10 from your own 5. And you couldn't trust him to make accurate passes. So what I saw from Arthur Smith's offense the last 2 seasons was trying to force the passing game, and there was very rarely any hitting receivers in stride. It was all a lot of, okay, it's going to run a fade because you got a couple of big old receivers like George Pickens and, you know, Drake London, similar guys. Or we're going to run button hooks, you know, outs, and everybody's catching it static and getting tackled. There was no run after the catch. And how I said about Arthur Smith is every single game at some point he hits the F it button, we're going to run the ball. And it would usually work. I mean, they developed a mentality where they would just say, we're going to run, you can't stop us. And come 3rd quarter, 4th quarter, that was usually the case. Were they still in the game or were the turnovers killing them? They always played pretty close games, you know, rarely blown out. And between Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier, they had a couple of really good running backs, experienced veteran offensive line, and bad quarterback play. So he's like, all right, you'd see in the first period, you'd see 3 and out on 3 passes. Then you might see a first down on 2 of 3 passes with a run. And by third quarter, it was like, yeah, touchdown drive, 14 plays with 13 runs. So I don't know that I saw the Arthur Smith offense because the quarterback play was so inconsistent that I don't think he could do what he wanted to do.
Yeah, because when he was in Tennessee, Ryan Tannehill was not. That was the best version of Ryan Tannehill we ever saw in the NFL.
Arthur Smith got a head coaching job on the back of what
Absolutely.
Ryan Tannehill was able to do in Tennessee.
So I'm curious. Just it seems like with the Steelers really focusing on the offensive line in the draft this year, they're trying to button that up. They do have some skill position players. I think we can all acknowledge the fact that they probably do need another receiver. But if you were to say that Arthur Smith's identity is what you just said, I want to run the ball. Like he hits the F it button and says, let's run the ball. That's ultimately what he wants to do, is it not?
You'd think, but then why am I spending back-to-back top 10 picks on receivers?
That's true.
So why is Kyle Pitts made the highest drafted player ever? Why, a tight end ever? Why is Drake London going number 8 overall when you don't have a quarterback? What? So the team building aspect of it, and I got a pretty good feeling Arthur Smith isn't going to have a whole lot to do with personnel decisions when it comes to, drafting up in Pittsburgh, because I'm of the universal opinion, yes, there are exceptions. Well, what about, yes, I know what about. Coaches and general managers are 2 separate jobs. And the more the coach is involved in picking players, the worse off he's going to end up being. It's a conflict of interest for me to choose the guy, negotiate his contract, and then coach him. One, it's a conflict of interest. 2, it's separate skill sets.
Right.
Coaches are egotistical enough to think that they can do both, and most of them can't. They just can't. So I like that separation of church and state, and the overall team building when you get multiple top 10 picks has been pretty good, and getting out of cap hell was pretty good in Atlanta. But ultimately, not getting a quarterback sunk him. It sunk him in Atlanta.
Well, let's talk about the quarterbacks, and let's talk about one quarterback in particular, and that would be Russell Wilson, who you covered last year with the Denver Broncos. And I've had some other people that covered the Broncos on my podcast, spoken to some people that watch the Broncos as close as I do the Pittsburgh Steelers. And it is really hit or miss the verdict you get when you ask them, what was Russell Wilson last year? You have those that say he was inconsistent. He didn't throw it over the middle. Jerry Jeudy was open all the time and he just couldn't see him. Then there were those that said he was actually pretty good. And given all the circumstances, Sean Payton and they butt heads, obviously. What was your takeaway from Russell Wilson last year?
Both of those can be true. So
that is
both
true
of those,
as well, yeah.
Both of those can be true. Russell Wilson is a 2-minute quarterback. Okay. He's a 2-minute drill quarterback where his weaknesses is staying within structure and trusting the play to develop. Okay. Russell Wilson will have one read. If there's pressure, he's gone. He's spinning out of it, rolling out and looking downfield, looking to make a play. So he's a one-read, improvised type of quarterback. That drives a megamaniacal, egomaniac, control freak like Sean Payton crazy.
Yeah.
Sean Payton wants his robot back there to go 1, 2, 3, 4, release. I don't want you thinking. I'm the coach. I'm doing the thinking. I don't want you thinking. That's what I'm here for. And Russell Wilson, with his size, stature, and everything, has never been comfortable in the pocket going through reads. So again, when we get to this again, what is Arthur Smith's offense going to be like? Ooh, boy, that's hard to tell because Russell Wilson will eventually devolve that into a Russell Wilson offense, which is a one read and bail.
Yeah.
And he's really, really talented. And George Pickens can play the Cortland Sutton role where Cortland Sutton had some mega catches. You'll never see one of those plays, one of those mega catches on a drop back, 5-step drop back, read and throw. They're all on scrambles. They're all on improvised plays. But George Pickens can play that role and have a huge season on broken plays because that's kind of the basis of the Russell Wilson offense is the broken play. And I was once told the broken play is no basis for an offense. So strong running game. I think the offensive line and the running game can be better in Pittsburgh than it was in Denver. And quick reads and, get rid of the ball quickly, but he doesn't excel. What Russell Wilson is best at is rolling out and improvising. That's where he excels. And if you keep the game close, by God, that works in last minute drives. What do you have? 5 game-winning drives last year?
Yeah.
Most quarterbacks don't do that. They don't make some of those plays, but you're hoping that you don't get to that point if you've got a quarterback. That's what the Broncos are banking on. Plus, they're going to pay a guy $3 million instead of $50 million.
Right.
Well, they're going to pay him $50 million anyway. But you know what I mean? Down the line, they're going to get out from under his contract.
Yeah.
That you can get a guy that's going to do what I want you to do instead of what you want to do. And that's Russell Wilson. But Russell Wilson can both be inconsistent and good. I mean, that's what inconsistent is.
That's true. And when you were going through the description of what he is, he doesn't like to stay within structure and he likes to bail early. Sounds a hell of a lot like the prime Ben Roethlisberger. Now, he's not the same size and stature, but Ben Roethlisberger was not Peyton Manning, 3-step drop, boom, 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 like you said, when you were basically describing Sean Payton to Drew Brees down in New Orleans. And my question is Ben Roethlisberger aged? He went into more of a system quarterback because he didn't have the skill set. So that's my next question for you. Does Russell Wilson, who's I think 35 years old, does he still have the skill set to be able to make those plays out of the pocket to elude pressure?
I don't know that he will ever be the Kirk Cousins. Let's just use Kirk Cousins. I mean, you can say Drew Brees, but a Kirk Cousins type with the mobility and patience in the pocket to, Peyton Manning didn't get sacked a ton that way.
Right.
You can be a mobile quarterback without being a running quarterback.
True.
By avoiding pressure, stepping up, all those type of things. No, I don't think so, because Russell Wilson's first instinct is to pull the ball down and put his head down. And you're 35 years old, brother. You're not 25 where you're trying to coach out of that. He is who he is at this point. If there's pressure on him, he's coming out of there. Look at his sack numbers. The last, he's like led the league in sacks because he's putting his offensive line under pressure by not being where he's supposed to be. A lot of times we do a pocket for you and you spin out outside the tackle right into the edge rusher. You're not outrunning that guy anymore. Right. You might have when you were 28 in Seattle. You're not doing that anymore. Now he's going to have those jaw-dropping, game-winning, game-changing plays, but there's a lot more bad that goes with it now. It's not a steady arc, a steady line graph of what'd you get out of Russell Wilson today. It's a roller coaster. And again, it goes back to the inconsistency. And then you say, okay, well, if it's not working with Russ, you go with Justin Fields. Well, Justin Fields is uber talented, but we don't know all of the things we've said about Russell Wilson is kind of Justin Fields plus. He's got a bigger arm. He's a faster runner. He's a bigger quarterback. He's also more inconsistent and less likely to stay in the pocket. So it's almost Justin Fields is almost Russell Wilson plus and minus. So
it's a weird
what is
dynamic.
Arthur Smith offense gonna look like? I know what he wants it to look like, but will it look like? Does he have the quarterback to do that? I don't know. Alex Smith would be a perfect guy for Arthur Smith. A Ryan Tannehill, somebody with some mobility, but who has the skill set to sit back in a pocket and run play action and go through reads and throw the ball over the middle.
Yeah, when you look at the Tennessee Titans back in like 2019, Tannehill, his back foot would hit, and if the ball was supposed to be there, it went there. And sometimes it shouldn't have gone there. Where sometimes you're like, where is he throwing? That's the read. If I see this coverage, is where I'm throwing the ball. And Arthur Smith designed it that way. Look, just throw it here. It's going to be open. And the way you describe these quarterbacks, because Justin Fields is, you probably studied him a lot, considering the fact that you wanted the Falcons to draft him. He is not a consistent line, as you mentioned, with Russell Wilson either. He is the holy cow, what a play. And then what the hell is that? And there is no, that's the one consistent with these two guys is that they're inconsistent. And that scares the hell out of me going into this season.
Well, the part of it, I'm still not ready to give up on Justin Fields, but there's a reason why the Broncos are paying your quarterback $50 million. There's a reason why you got Justin Fields for a song and a guy that I said I would have taken number 2 overall in that draft. I don't hindsight grade. He was my number 2 pick in a draft that was loaded. In a redraft, Micah Parsons probably goes number 2. But, right now it would have, back then it would have been Justin Fields for me. He was in a terrible situation in Chicago, again. So we're going, what makes a quarterback a good quarterback? One of those is the environment that he's in. Some guys will never get it, and there will be fans that look at the tools of Justin Fields and go off their initial evaluation and say, "Oh, the coaching staff ruined him. It was all of them. We failed Justin Fields." No, I don't believe that, but I also don't believe he's been put in the best situation to thrive. And I think the Pittsburgh Steelers is a much better situation under Mike Tomlin. I mean, the consistency is there. Arthur Smith is a good offensive coordinator. He gets his guys to play hard for him. He puts his offensive linemen in good situations. The quarterbacks can undo a lot of that, though, is the problem.
Yes. I want to ask you one final question here from an outsider's perspective. You're not a Steelers fan. You don't cover the team. Mike Tomlin has openly said that Russell Wilson will start in quote unquote pole position as the starting quarterback, but that it will be a competition. If you were to predict who starts in week 1 and who starts in week 18, what's your prediction for the Steelers?
Let's go week 16 because week 18 you could be just throwing guys out there.
That is true.
I think Russell Wilson starts week 1.
I agree.
Yeah, I think he starts week 1. He's just it's easier for him, the veteran, to come in. But by God, see, you're the Steelers. You're not a team who's trying to figure out you want to go to the playoffs. Period.
Right.
So you can't say like the Broncos were close last year. They're kind of fringe playoff after that 6-1 streak, but they take a look down the line and say, okay, we owe this guy $85 million over the course of the next 2 years, or we could save $30 million in 2025 if we have the double the biggest dead cap hit in the history of this game. That's what we want to do. It's a low risk, high reward situation with both of these guys. To get to it, I'd like to find out what I got in Justin Fields.
Yeah.
But I'm not at practice every day, and they may already know.
It's true.
They may already know. You hear that all the time. Fans say, "Put him out there. We want to know what we got, brother." If they don't have it, I can tell before he ever steps foot on a football field.
Yeah.
I mean, in a game, I can tell he's been god awful in practice. Why would I put him in a game? So if it's close, Justin Fields can be your future. He's young enough, tools enough. He can be. When we talked about, I'd like to trade for Justin Fields and then draft JJ McCarthy in Atlanta. Well, if Justin Fields is good, you're going to have to pay him a ton of money. So what? Just start with the beginning of that phrase. Justin Fields is good. I'm good. That's what you're going for, right?
Exactly.
So I'd like to find out what I got in Justin Fields if it's even close.
All right. I appreciate the outsider's perspective. And I appreciate you taking the time, Scott. I want to give you the opportunity to plug anything that you're doing, not just your Atlanta Falcons coverage, but your Denver Broncos stuff, and anything else you want to plug. Go ahead and do that now.
Yeah, the easiest thing to do, just find me at Scott Kennedy. I'm doing all kinds of stuff. I run a production company that publishes multiple websites, do some draft stuff, or you can just find me at youtube.com/Scott Kennedy. That's where my Senior Bowl stuff is. I do some podcasts, do Falcons podcasts. As the season goes on, we'll get our national podcast rolling again. My podcast partner is a new dad, so we've been taking Fridays off for the last couple months while he enjoys that. So youtube.com/Scott Kennedy or Scout Kennedy on X.
Scott, again, appreciate it, man. We'll talk soon. Take it easy.